The knock came just as the wind began to rise, rattling the old wooden shutters and carrying the sharp scent of rain across the open land. The rancher had been standing at the kitchen sink, staring out into the dark fields that stretched endlessly beyond the porch light, when he heard it, soft at first, almost uncertain, as if the person on the other side expected the door to remain closed. He wiped his hands on a towel and crossed the room. When he opened the door, the night revealed a woman standing on the porch, shoulders drawn inward against the cold. Her coat was worn thin at the elbows, the hem damp with dust and rain. Strands of hair clung to her face, and her eyes, too weary for someone so young, lifted to meet his with a mix of caution and fragile hope. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said quietly. "I was told this ranch, I was told you might help." He studied her for a brief moment, long enough to take in the exhaustion in her posture, the way her hands trembled as she clasped them together. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she'd come from. The storm was coming fast, and whatever had driven her here had already taken more than enough. "You'd better come inside," he said, stepping aside. Weather's turning. Relief washed over her face so quickly it almost hurt to see. She nodded, murmured a soft thank you, and crossed the threshold as if afraid the invitation might disappear. Warmth wrapped around her instantly, the smell of coffee, wood smoke, and something steady and familiar. She stood just inside the door, uncertain, until he closed it behind her and set the latch. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the table. "You look like you've had a long road." She obeyed, lowering herself into the chair slowly, as though her body was only now realizing it could rest. He poured her a cup of coffee and set it in front of her, then ladled stew from the pot still warming on the stove. The simple kindness made her eyes sting, and she blinked rapidly, focusing on the steam rising from the bowl. "Thank you," she whispered. They ate in silence for a while. He noticed how carefully she ate, like someone who had learned not to expect more than what was given. When she finally looked up, her gaze drifted around the room, over the worn furniture, the faded curtains, and the photographs lining the hallway wall. "Storm'll be bad tonight," he said. "You can stay. There's a spare room down the hall." Her hand stilled around the spoon. "I don't want to be any trouble." "You're not," he replied simply. "Everyone needs a roof sometimes." Tears welled in her eyes, and she quickly lowered her head. "Thank you," she said again, the word heavier this time. He showed her to the spare room, pointing out the bathroom and leaving fresh blankets on the bed. As she stepped inside, her gaze drifted back to the hallway. Her eyes caught on one of the photographs, a younger man standing beside the rancher, both of them smiling, arms slung over each other's shoulders. She stopped. Her breath caught so sharply it made her dizzy. She reached out, fingers hovering just above the frame, afraid to touch it. The name pressed against her chest, sudden and unbearable. Daniel. The rancher didn't notice. He had already turned away, heading back toward the kitchen, unaware that the quiet kindness he'd offered without question had brought the past knocking at his door, and that the name she carried would soon change everything he thought he knew. Sleep came in fragments. For her, it was shallow and uneasy, filled with half-remembered roads and faces she hadn't seen in years. For the rancher, it didn't come at all. The storm rolled in just after midnight, rain drumming hard against the roof, wind pressing at the walls like a restless thing. He sat at the kitchen table long after the lamp should have been turned down, staring into a mug of untouched coffee, telling himself there was nothing unusual about offering shelter to a stranger. He'd done it before. This was no different, but something about her presence lingered in the air, quiet and unresolved. Sometime past midnight, he heard the soft creak of floorboards in the hallway. He looked up as she appeared in the doorway, wrapped in one of the spare blankets, her face pale, eyes wide as if she'd been fighting herself for courage. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," he replied, though his voice was rough. "You all right?" She hesitated, fingers tightening around the blanket. There's something I should tell you. I should have said it sooner." He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit." She moved slowly, carefully, as though each step was a decision she might still turn back from. When she sat, the lamp cast a warm circle of light around them, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. For a moment, she only stared at her hands. "I didn't end up here by chance," she said finally. "I was looking for this place." That made him straighten. "You were?" She nodded. "My mother used to talk about this ranch. About a man who helped her when she was young and had nowhere else to go." A faint, uneasy recognition stirred in him. He leaned back slightly, studying her face more closely now, searching for something familiar, though he couldn't yet say what. "She told me his name," the woman continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said his name was Daniel." The sound of the name felt like a sudden drop in the floor beneath him. His breath caught, sharp and involuntary. Daniel, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. A name that lived only in memory and unanswered questions. "Why would she tell you that name?" he asked, slowly. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. "Because Daniel was my father." The words settled between them, heavy and final. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor as he turned away, one hand braced against the counter. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, as if echoing the chaos in his chest. His brother's face flashed in his mind, laughing, restless, full of plans. Then the silence, the disappearance, the years of not knowing. Behind him, she rose from her chair. "I understand if you want me to leave," she said quietly. "I didn't come here to cause pain. I just needed to know." He closed his eyes. All the kindness he'd offered without thought now tangled with disbelief, anger, grief, and something dangerously close to guilt. He hadn't known Daniel had left anything behind. Hadn't known there was a child. No, a woman now, who carried his brother's blood. "I should have told you earlier," she continued. "But you were kind to me, and I was afraid the truth would change that." He turned back slowly. The shock was still there, but beneath it was something else, recognition. He could see Daniel in her now, in the shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw. "You don't have to go tonight," he said at last, his voice low. "Storm's too bad." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you." Neither of them slept after that. They sat at opposite ends of the table, talking in careful pieces, about her mother, about the years of wondering, about a man who had vanished and left questions behind. Outside, the storm raged on, unaware that a single whispered name had just reopened a past neither of them had ever truly left behind. Morning came slowly, pale and fragile, stretching its soft light across the ranch and melting the edges of the storm that had battered the land overnight. The wind had softened to a whisper, and the rain had left the earth steaming with the scent of wet soil and pine. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fire still lingered, filling the room with a comforting glow, though the air was heavy with the unspoken weight of the night's revelations. The rancher paced near the window, hands braced against the sill, staring out at the clearing where the trees shook gently in the morning breeze. His thoughts were a tangle of disbelief, memories, and cautious hope. The name she had whispered, the one he had never expected to hear, echoed in his mind. Daniel, his brother, his past, and now, this woman, standing quietly in his home, carried that name like a living bridge from everything he had lost to a future he hadn't dared imagine. She appeared in the doorway, hesitating. Her hair was damp from the residual moisture of the storm, and her eyes, red from tears and exhaustion, met his. She clutched the blanket he had offered her the night before closer around her shoulders, as if it were both armor and comfort. I should leave, she said softly, her voice trembling, though her composure was stronger than he expected. I shouldn't be here. He turned slowly, keeping his gaze steady. No, he said firmly. You can't leave. Not today, not after last night. Her breath caught in her throat. She had come prepared to be rejected once he knew the truth, prepared to take the blame for opening old wounds, prepared to leave and bear the weight of her father's absence alone. But now, standing in front of him, she felt the first flicker of something she hadn't dared to hope for, acceptance. I don't want to cause more trouble, she whispered, stepping closer. You're not causing trouble, he said. Your family. The word struck her with such force that she stumbled slightly, catching herself on the back of a chair. Family. She had spent years without the connection of blood or home, and yet, here it was, offered freely despite everything she had feared. Her chest ached in relief, and tears streamed unrestrained this time, sliding down her cheeks as she let herself finally feel the enormity of what had happened. He moved toward her, slow and deliberate, and offered her the warmth of his presence. You can stay as long as you need, he said, his voice softer now, more personal, carrying a weight of promise she hadn't expected. This place, it's yours now too. She sank into the chair, exhaustion and emotion overtaking her, her hands clutching the blanket as if it could absorb her fear and grief. He sat across from her, the space between them no longer cold or filled with tension but alive with a fragile trust, built in the darkness of the storm and in the unspoken understanding that they were now linked by more than circumstance. They spoke quietly, sharing stories, about her mother, about Daniel, about the years lost to silence, about hopes and regrets. Each word wove a thread of connection between them, stitching together the torn edges of the past with the promise of something new. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, spilling golden light into the room, catching on the dust motes in the air, painting their shared space with warmth. By midday, the storm had completely passed. The ranch yard was glistening with wet snow melting into the earth, birds chirping tentatively from the treetops, and the distant mountains standing silent and steadfast. Inside, the cabin felt lighter, filled with a tentative hope neither of them had dared to voice the night before. For the first time since she had stepped onto his porch, she believed she had found more than shelter. She had found acceptance, understanding, and the beginnings of a family she hadn't known she could have. And for the rancher, the walls of solitude he had built around himself began to crumble, softened by a young woman's courage. And a name that had reopened a past he thought he'd buried forever. In that quiet ranch cabin, surrounded by the aftermath of the storm, two lives converged, reshaped by truth, trust, and the fragile promise of belonging. And though neither could predict the days ahead, they knew this: what began with a whispered name had changed everything.